what we do is we have to discuss it's everybody knows that the Democrats, I would hope, feel as if blue checkmark Democrats especially, they own the vote and they are owed, not owned, they are owed, let's say obligated to have, more precisely putting it. They are obligated to have the vote of people that are not white men. So what's happened is Donald Trump has got the support, more support than what he did, at least in comparison to the 16 election, in a number of different areas. And what we're seeing in terms of as exit polls start to come out, he rose very slightly in among black voters. Of all people, ironically enough, he went down on were white men. So you can't blame them. But he had in terms of other, I know I saw there was a plus like 5 there in percentage points, but as well as like Hispanic voters, LGBT voters, which is the main thing that I want to talk about here, black voters, where he had a slight uptick. It was actually the white men that he had. If he could have, he probably would have won this by way of a landslide if he even just maintained the white male vote that he had previously. But the white men were not coming out for him in support, or rather more, they were maybe supporting the opposition in comparison to what happened, let's say last election. Hilariously enough, the blue check marks have come in just so distraught, confused even, that something like this could happen. Out Magazine, this increase in LGBTQ support for Trump is frightening to see. Charles Blow, that blow hard, says, he was talking about black men earlier. He also says in a tweet, if you're viewing or not viewing this and you're listening to the audio or reading tweets here, says also the percentage of LGBT voting for Trump doubled from 2016. Doubled. This is why LGBT of color doesn't really trust the white guys. Somehow they found a way to blame the white guys, even though, again, white males did not vote for him as much as they did in the last election. He didn't get as good of a percentage. But we saw what happened with Florida, which I was telling people to pay attention to. Florida is a big deal right now because he didn't just win. He won commandingly enough. Like, I believe in the last, 7 elections, it was decided by within like a couple of percentage points. And I believe he was almost at like 4. That's a pretty big deal. And a lot of that comes from Hispanic voters supporting him. And a lot of these Democrats, a lot of these blue check marks who just don't seem to understand. We were reading a lot of these on air if you were watching us on Blaze TV. And you saw how they were just like, F you, yeah, Toure. That Toure guy was like, not Mach Toure, the Toure guy that was on CNN, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was MSNBC, I can't remember. It's all the same. But they were like, he was like, yeah, if you're a black person, you voted for Trump, F you. This votes, this is on the white women, or this is on the Hispanic votes. And now you're saying, well, they wanted a path to whiteness, to more Cuban voters. They feel as if they are owed your vote, obligated to have your vote if you're not a straight white man. If you are a black person, you are a member of the LGBT, you are Hispanic, and you don't vote, or you did not in this election vote for who they thought you were supposed to be supporting, and Joe Biden, you are a problem. And they just can't see that. Democrats, for those of you that are in the chat that may be Biden supporters. And we saw this actually in Texas as well in a couple of spots. And I'm going to speak on Texas in a little bit. But Texas as well in some spots where even the Hispanics, and I think this is why you're don't misspeak and say, well, it's also, well, one was, you have the more Cuban, American, and then you have and when it comes to Hispanic voters, you have also the Mexican Americans, and those are splitting and there's some truth to that. However, even when it comes out here in Texas, you're seeing some pockets that obviously in Texas, it's more Mexican American. And you're even seeing that Trump was getting some support, a lot more support there in a lot of pockets, which they don't anticipate. And I think that this is alarming for the Democrats, maybe not short term, because they may end up pulling out this election. Whether they steal it or not, they may end up getting it. But what you're seeing is that there's a shift beginning to happen. Now, can they retain that, or in terms of how it was? Can they pump enough propaganda to get it back to where it was? Possibly, potentially. I don't know. But you have to understand that a lot of the things that have been taking place, I know that Democrats have this way of, and progressives have this way of trying to lump everybody in this monolithic block, as in, okay, we're Democrats, we care about non-white people, non-white male people, right? And they conflate issues with them. And that's what's gotten them in trouble. Like a lot of Hispanics, when they're like the whole ACAB thing and the whole defunding the police, no matter what my position is, about my position on that. What I'm talking about is the position in terms of how it pertains or how it impacts Hispanic voters. They weren't necessarily on, a lot of them weren't on board with that. Right. So when you go burn down a church or something like that, or you kind of have this sort of anti-religious aspect, a lot of them, they don't like that. I'm not saying that it's overwhelmingly the case, but what I'm pointing to, and what Democrats should pay attention to, is how that actually gets them in trouble when they do treat them like they're this monolithic block. And you conflate issues, right? Like, and you say, well, this is why the term persons of color is so stupid, because persons of color, just because you're not white does not mean y'all think the same. Doesn't mean you value the same thing. So just because you're shouting with a fist in the air, Black Lives Matter, and then you conflate that with ACAB and you conflate that with defund the police, does not mean there are other persons of color that are with that shit. You know what I'm saying? So that to me is what the change, where you're starting to see that coming to fruition, which I think it obviously started before this. And I think this year the Democrats didn't do themselves any favor. Definitely post George Floyd, and influencing people. They had like an opportunity there. And then you saw that the support for Black Lives Matter, which went to an all-time high, started to dip, just as an example. Right. And if they keep treating everybody like they're monolithic and they feel like they're old, it's going to get them in trouble in the long run. And this is where Republicans, or rather conservatives, have an opportunity, but I think they're too culturally inept to take advantage of it. Something else we're going to talk about in this show, and I'll be talking about it in a couple of segments, because there was no way that this race should have been close. Right? There was no way this race should have been close. We'll get to that in a minute. But we're talking about this particular issue, Democrats better start paying attention to that. They better start paying attention, and they better stop treating them like they're monolithic, because they don't understand that they're pushing people away. So when you do act surprised when he's getting more of the Hispanic vote as anticipated, more of the LGBT, which he was never an anti-LGBTQ president anyway. He was actually arguably the most of all time, the most pro-LGBT, certainly when president, going into office. Not even Obama was with that in 2008 when he came in, right? So as that happens and you look at that, like, how could that potentially be? Blue check marks got to step down from their thrones, right? Their high rises, and really pay attention to the world. Twitter and Instagram ain't real life.